In this third and final part of our series on Conscious Manifestation 2020, Eckhart looks at what's possible once we come into presence, the fullness, the freedom, the natural abundance of life. Here's Eckhart Tolle.
The collective suffering that humans are experiencing at the present time is also an opportunity that's opening up for millions of humans, not that they're all going to recognize that and be able to use it, but some will, perhaps many, an opportunity for the beginning of an awakening, or perhaps even more than just the beginning of an awakening, the opportunity for an awakening of consciousness. Because if you don't, then you stay stuck in suffering. And you cannot manifest a better life for yourself or a better world from the place of suffering. You need to have gone beyond suffering in order to be able to manifest a better world. So the foundational step then is what I just described. And then you, as the transmutational process continues in you, then you are able occasionally to perhaps have certain thoughts that are no longer in conflict with the emotional reality in you, because there has been a transmutation of the fear, and when you can feel that intense presence, this is a good time, if you even want to do it, you can have a visualization or an affirmation of the goodness of life or the abundance of life, that life is abundant and it's no longer a lie. Because when you sense that presence in you, before it was fear perhaps, and then it's become presence, there is a feeling of intense aliveness. There is a heightened aliveness in that presence that would not have been there if life had not challenged you and first made you suffer and then caused you to become more conscious in order to transcend the suffering. That's how evolution happens. And so there is an aliveness in that conscious presence that is inseparable from what we may call abundance. That brings me to one of my favorite sayings of Jesus. He said, I want you to have the abundant life. That's in one translation. In another translation, it says, I want you to have the fullness of life. So some Bibles translate it as abundant life. Some Bibles translate it as the fullness of life. I want you to have the fullness of life. He's talking, yes, abundant life. What does that mean? Abundance in conventional terms, when you think of abundance, we think of many things. You can have lots of things and you have abundance. But true abundance is something, it's not lots of things, although maybe lots of things may come to you, but you don't need lots of things in order to experience abundance. You experience abundance through experiencing the presence within you is the abundance. It is the fullness of life. the fullness of life that is within you now. Oh. And then we come to another saying of Jesus. So we're talking about Jesus. Let's use another very important, the most important thing anybody has ever said about manifesting things is in one sentence that Jesus said, that you don't need all the books written about manifesting. Once you understand that one sentence, you don't need to read any of them. And that sentence is, when you pray for something, believe that you have received it and it will be yours. Believe that, now the key, of course, is not believe that you will receive it. The key is believe that you have received it. And then it will be yours. The will be refers to the thing, whatever it is that you pray for. But what does that mean? How can you believe that you have received it when obviously you haven't received it? Now, this can only be understood together with his statement about the fullness of life. It is when you realize the fullness of life, that is the power of your own consciousness. It's not your own, but let's just call it your own. It's universal consciousness. And this awareness, this presence is universal consciousness. Let's temporarily call it your consciousness. It's not yours, because if you say your consciousness, you have a separation between you and consciousness. But there is no duality here. There's only the consciousness that you are. So when you realize that the power of your consciousness, the power of consciousness is the fullness of life. And you can then, nothing that you could add to yourself could be any greater than that. So when you realize the fullness of life, which you can only realize in the present moment, when the emotion of fear or other negative emotion has become transmuted into intense presence, then this intense presence is the fullness of life. Anything else that you could obtain in life and that you as a person may want or may enjoy or may need on a personal level is the icing on the cake. Now, to this important realization that all manifestation, you can only be a really successful manifestation practitioner if you realize that whatever you manifest is the icing on the cake, because you already have the cake. You are the cake. If you don't realize that, then life is frustrating, because even whatever you do manifest, if you think that's the cake, it's not going to satisfy you for long. It might even make you sick. If you eat too much cake, it may make you sick. So the cake is the essence of who you are, is the presence. If you bring an image of what you want to obtain or achieve into that feeling of presence or aliveness, then that can become a very powerful manifestation. You want to have a better place to live, perhaps, whatever it is. But you don't need it to experience the fullness of life. You can only be successful at manifesting if you don't need whatever it is that you want to manifest in order to give you the experience of the fullness of life, which we could use other words to describe it, the experience of being fully yourself, the experience of having made it, the experience of a fuller sense of identity, whatever it may be, because people don't want the thing that they think they want. They want the feeling that that thing will give them. You don't want the car just for the sake of the car. You want the feeling that is associated with the car and the mental image that's associated with I am the owner of this car. It's my car. That's what they want. The car itself would be meaningless. So they want whatever they want is always a secondary thing. They want this fullness of life through something else. So I'm really describing how manifestation does not work. And even if it did work in that way, and sometimes it does in a limited way, it's not the answer, and it doesn't make you happy, and it won't ultimately solve anything. So the powerful manifester, if that's a word, is the one who is already in touch with the fullness of life and manifests from the fullness of life. And again, Jesus said, so many beautiful things there. Find only the kingdom of heaven that is within you, which is again the fullness of life, which is the presence, the unconditioned consciousness, and all the things that you need or think you need will be added onto you. That's an amazing thing. It's even when you do not specifically attempt or practice manifesting specific things in your life, which some people do and some don't. It's an interesting practice. But even if you did not want to manifest specific things, your life will change as a result of being in touch with that dimension within you, the fullness of life. Because from there, manifestation happens. It even happens when you're no longer even want to manifest because you're fine, but you represent then a different level of consciousness in this world, and the way in which you experience this world changes, and the way in which you affect the world changes. So you cannot help but manifest when you undergo this shift in consciousness. And even if you don't undergo it fully, you still begin to manifest a different world. First of all, a different world for yourself, because the way in which you experience the world depends on your state of consciousness. One person may react to the same circumstances very differently from another person, depending on their level of consciousness. So one person encounter a particular form of adversity, a very unconscious person, and reacts in their way. So they experience a very different world from a person who meets the same adversity from an awakened state of consciousness, experience it a different world. And not only that, the way in which let's say, whatever event you're experiencing in the present moment, the way in which you meet this event, the state of consciousness from which you meet this event determines the subsequent development of that event. This is a somewhat esoteric thing, but the so-called world and your state of consciousness are a single phenomenon. There is not really a world if nobody experiences it. So the consciousness that you are and the world are a single thing. When your consciousness changes, the world changes. First of all, the way in which you experience the world changes. It basically means the world changes for you. And if the world changes for a sufficient number of people, then even the so-called outside world changes. So for the world to change, there needs to be a shift in consciousness. But you begin to experience this in your own life first, and then you begin to inhabit a different world. So you manifest, of course, always. Most people manifest, as I'm sure you know, most people manifest unconsciously because their conditioning of the way in which their mind is conditioned determines how they experience events in their life, and that becomes their world. So they manifest every moment. So how do you manifest your experience of this moment? That's another way of looking at manifestation. How do you manifest this moment? It depends on your level or state of consciousness. And so there's your freedom. You are not dependent ultimately on external conditions. And that's when you realize that you are not at the mercy of what's happening or not happening around you. So you develop, this is a wonderful realization, a wonderful freedom, that your consciousness is not dependent on this or that happening or not happening. That's an incredible realization, and it's a sense of liberation.